I want to give you right now 6 questions to ask yourself about your family history stuff. The first one is, why do you want for future generations to keep this? I want you to think about why what you're talking about or keeping is important to you, and what the people whose house you're cleaning out would want. In Swedish death cleaning, they talk about what you would want those people, only the people who are going to clean out your house, what would they want? But I want you to be a little more generous with that. Being family historians, once you've thrown it away, it's gone. And I want you to think a little further down the line. So my mother-in-law had 3 sons. And if you look at further down the generations, there's going to be quite a few people that are interested in her things. I have some notable ancestors, 4 or 5, 6 generations up. And those items, those heirlooms, have been spread out across the family so far that I don't even know where they are. I might get a tag on Family Search or something that a cousin has something. But there are very few things that I have from some of those ancestors way back, right? And if they'd saved a little more, then I might have something too. But the trick is not overburdening that first generation with too much stuff that they just get frustrated and throw it out. And when we do charts, when we print charts with the company that I have, I'm continually amazed at how big a family gets, how fast. We do these big family reunion charts and things like that. And I've been really conservative on this chart. I can tell you that in 5, 6 generations, you're going to have a whole lot more children than that if you've got a family, even just of a couple of people in the beginning. So I want you to think about and be interested in what the people further down the line are going to be thinking about, and what would you save for them. Second, I want you to think about what preserves the personality of a person. Nan Pfeiffer says, the external facts about a life can be researched generations later, but the inner life is irrevocably lost unless written during one's lifetime. In fact, Judy Russell gave a wonderful Roots Tech talk, a keynote, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, where she talked about how we lose a personality in about 3 generations. Because I might know my grandfather, maybe 1 or 2 great-grandparents, and I might know them personally and know their personality, but unless we record that, the personality of the next generation up is going to be lost. You can research those facts, but you can't know much about who they are. I read a blog post once, and the reason I've got lipstick and perfume up here on this slide is I read a blog post once, and I'm sorry I can't find it again. If any of you know where this is, I would love an email about it. I read a blog post once about a lady who was cleaning out her mother's house, and she talked about throwing out her lipstick and how a lipstick isn't something you would save. But once she threw that out, nobody would ever know what color her mom's lipstick was ever again. And it was really, really moving to hear about how she was choosing what parts of her mother's personality to save. Once you throw that out, it's gone. And I hope you'll look for things that really personalize them and exhibit their personality. Now, many things can be written about or captured or photographed. You wouldn't save a lipstick, but you might write it down. You know, clothes or colors or children's artwork sometimes go better passed down in photographs or in stories. But look for things that epitomize their personality. My grandfather, one of my grandfathers, was a university professor at Berkeley. And I remember as a child his push-button typewriter and playing with that with him. And to think that he wrote his doctoral dissertation and typed it over and over and over again on that, right? I would give anything to have that typewriter now, because my children would be blown away, blown away. My other grandfather was an airline mechanic, and he used to say that if you bought yourself the tool and fixed it yourself, then you'd save that money next time when you had to fix it again. And so he had a huge garage just full of every tool under the sun. And we have a lot of those. We have some socket sets and things like that that were my grandfather's. And those are really precious to me because those things epitomized who he was. So think about what's going to preserve the personality of something and what you will lose if this item's discarded. Okay, then third, I want you to think about who the correct person is to inherit this. So in my mother-in-law's stuff, there's me and then our children and eventually, hopefully, grandchildren and things like that. Now, we had a lot of pictures in her stuff of her brother, Uncle Bob. And if you think about it, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, who's going to value that picture more? My grandchildren or his great-grandchildren? His. And that's why we put together this bookshelf, and we're sending those pictures of Bob to him. Now, my children might appreciate a scan or, a digital document of that. They don't want to lose all the pictures of, you want to know the whole family history. But the originals really should go to Bob and be passed down in his line. So again, I want you to think way down the line and distribute now what you can for further generations to go in the right place. And then I want you to think about what can I organize and explain now. This is a shot out of part of my china cabinet. And I brought out the little slips of paper that I have with some of the heirlooms that we have. Normally they're tucked behind and things so that you don't see them necessarily. But you can see I've got little slips of paper as to who's and why it's important. The painting is actually a painting by my grandfather's sister. And there's an example of, I can't tell you exactly what to keep and what not. In the last example, I just said you would send that to her family. But she was a very prolific painter, and I know her family has a whole lot of things, and I love this painting. And I'm going to vest my children in understanding who that was and what that was, and I'm going to hold on to that one this time, at least for now. We'll see. But lots of things. One of my precious, precious heirlooms is that World War II wedding cake topper of my grandparents. And of course, that's very much labeled with the wedding date and all of those things. This quilt that I have is so much more meaningful and even visceral to me when you see this picture that goes with it. And that's me playing with my dolls under the quilt as my grandmother was making that quilt. Clearly, that needs to be connected, because otherwise, somebody might think it's just another quilt, and it's an old quilt, and it's not that big of a deal, right? But this was the quilt I inherited when my grandmother passed. So, next question, I want you to think about what is the digestible scope and size of the history I want passed down. Now, I have 3 kids, and if you look at all those scrapbooks, they may or may not be able to deal with all of that. Lots of family history in there, lots of original documents and things like that. But the one part that you might not notice is these right here. And those are where I've taken some of those stories and boiled them down, and where I've taken some of those documents. Even those scrapbooks, I can just scan those and put them into a smaller format. So I can take, my mom has done some of this, I can take those and just make copies and bind them. I can publish them in a hard copy book, but I'm going to digest those a little better for my kids. My mom actually is really good at this. She has actually taken some of the histories that she's doing. Those are actually hers over on the left side there. And she's taken those, she's written some small books about the family history people that she knew, and then she's actually boiled that down into a children's book. We're going to come back to that too, but one of the key things is helping them understand it and value it now. And those children's books in my whole house are what I would save in a fire, because those are precious and priceless. I love how she's boiled that down. Hopefully we'll save a lot of other things too, but anyway. Okay, and then I want you to think about who will best preserve my history. Think about who will best appreciate it. There may be people in your descendancy who have particular interests, like music or sports. That person's going to be very vested and connected with that item, that heirloom. You also might think about well-established entities like libraries or museums or archives or websites. Again, I want you to think way far ahead and think, where will my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren be able to find this? And sometimes a museum or an archive might be a really good place to preserve some of that. My dad was involved in his career in turning some of the 2-year colleges in Utah into 4-year colleges. And UVU has just asked to keep some of his papers from his career in their library, Utah Valley University, because he was very critical in changing them from a 2-year college to a 4-year college. And honestly, I think that's the best place for some of his career papers, because honestly, we're probably not as vested in that as we are in some of his other life mementos. And so I think that's actually going to be a good place, even though I'm losing kind of control of them. But it's in a good archive place that they'll preserve it. And if you have ancestors that were involved in the railroad or involved in veterans or any number of things, there may be some other places that might be interested geographically, maybe a local historical society, something like that. There may be other places that might be interested in some of those items. So I want to talk about physical materials, and then I want to talk about digital materials for a minute and how to preserve those. Again, one of the biggest things that you need to think about is not creating a burden for this next generation, but creating something that can be treasured further down the line. And usually an heirloom, a physical material, can only be passed down one line of the family. And one family may have preserved many physical heirlooms, but then in several generations, only select members of the family will have something from a great-great-great-great-grandmother. The trick is just not to burden that top generation. I have a handkerchief from my 5th great-grandmother. I mean, think how precious that is. But part of why it's precious is because it's so rare and it's so far back, okay? So, with heirlooms, one of the important things to remember is they're only as valuable as the story that comes with it. If I told you that this jewelry was my great-grandmother's jewelry, that would make it more important than anything else in my jewelry box, right? What if I told you that it was given to her by her father on her wedding day? That makes it even a little more valuable. What if I told her that he gave them to her on her wedding day because they were his grandmother's? Again, that makes it even more valuable. What if I had specific dates and specific photos where they were wearing those pieces? Then they become all the more valuable, okay? And I also want you to think about distributing these sooner rather than later, too. And this is where I can't really tell you. I had a friend just barely ask me about a collection of love letters. What would you do with that? She heard I was speaking here. And she said, do I split it up? Do I keep it together? What do I do? And in general, I think the idea is to give it away sooner rather than later so that people can value that now. But in her case, I ended up saying, maybe hold on to it for a little while and just kind of see who's interested and see who's going to value that the most. And it depends on what that next generation's interest is going to be. Of course, a collection of love letters is something you could digitize, too. But talk to that next generation about what they think is important. What if my daughter doesn't particularly like jewelry? What if I have a daughter-in-law who really values that? What if my daughter doesn't particularly like jewelry, but really values these because she knows how important they are? You have to talk to them and be able to discuss, what's important here. With documentation, there's 2 places that they should go. The originals should be preserved in archival materials. Make sure that photos, journals, address books, even recipe books, calendars, yearbooks, scrapbooks, letters, any of those. Use archival materials, make sure that they're preserved well. But also, any kind of documentation you can also digitize. And you can put that into databases, you can share that digitally, so that everyone will have access generations from now. So an heirloom can only go down one line, really. But documentation, especially digitally, can be spread out in the whole family. And if you think about those charts I've been putting up there, this cousin over here may own the original, but this cousin over here and everybody else along the line can get to it if it's in a database or if it's out there somewhere.